Home, Chapter 73. A Miraculous Ladybug Fanfiction written and narrated by Rose. If you have not heard the previous 72 chapters of this story, don't brag about skipping them. If you don't know what's going on at this point, that's mostly on you. Maybe a little bit of my storytelling, but if you skipped parts, I'm low-key disappointed in you. Actually, no, I'm high-key. Anyway, Chapter 73. Enjoy. Adrian as, well, himself. Adrian wasn't quite sure how they got in this position, but he wasn't complaining. Marinette went to clean up, and when she invited him for breakfast, she told him he couldn't come in unless he detransformed, else he'd track in flour. It was a ludicrous idea at first, considering that he couldn't even leave the house without his mask, but he tried it anyway. And there was strength in that. The trying. Except, well, it wasn't entirely successful. Sure, he didn't track in flour now that he didn't have the suit on, but he couldn't share breakfast with her. He'd barely taken 2 bites with zero eye contact and fell prey to vertigo. So here he was, lying on the living room couch with his head in Marinette's lap, faced away from her as she ran her fingers through his hair. If they were an actual engaged couple, this would be cute. But between the dizziness and the shame that burned his face whenever he thought about it, it was something out of a fevered nightmare. At least he wasn't trembling. Still woozy? His hand, strung over the side of the couch and clutching a bucket on the floor, tightened its grip at the question. Had he actually eaten something in the last 12 hours? He'd likely have shown another side of himself he didn't want someone to witness. The kind that should be part of drinks with friends and a college experience, not trauma in a boy who can't face genetics. Yeah. I've read that when you feel depression kicking in, you should start moving. A crazy dance, or a walk, or jumping jacks. Stuff like that. Thanks, Marinette. Her giggle, like a bell, rang above him. Yeah, I suppose you're right. If only it were depression. Well, no, he shouldn't wish for that. Oh, Kitty. Her fingers stopped exploring his hair. How are we going to fix you? His throat tightened. He didn't know. It looks like I'll be a baker's apprentice and work for my father-in-law, he tried. Father-in-law. He wasn't even sure if they were engaged, but it felt good to say. Tom Dupang's son. There was a time that it was all he wanted. To be Marinette's family, even if Marinette wasn't part of it. I suppose this means we should probably let them know we're superheroes, huh? He knew she meant it playfully, but the thought froze him, Tom knowing that he was that aggressed boy. Adrian jerked forward, rolling himself off her lap and catching his hand on the coffee table, stretched between it and the couch as he dry-heaved into the bucket. Oh, thank the Kwame's creators he hadn't eaten anything, although he could feel the blood vessels in his eyes fight against the rest of his body, seeking a way out. Marinette rubbed his back as he retched, the sounds he made echoing across the room so loud he worried the bakery could hear it below. Why was he like this? Still hanging above the bucket after he'd finished, Adrian willed himself not to cry. You okay? He couldn't see her face.
I hate myself, Marinette.
Well, that's silly. Her answer, so straightforward, so clear, caught him by surprise, and he looked up, making eye contact as he forgot, briefly, the face he wore was his own.
Marinette,
he began, not wanting a pep talk after so many embarrassing moments at his lowest points. I wouldn't marry a man worthy of hate. She leaned forward, cupping his face in her hands, and he remembered his mask. His hand slipped off the coffee table as he reached to cover, sending both of them toppling to the floor. He hit his head, and the empty puke bucket clattered as it rolled a meter away. She was on his chest now, curled in a way that only came from a fall.
Oh, well,
he said, not sure how to salvage the situation.
At least buy me dinner first.
She laughed into his collarbone, lifting herself to tower above him. Your face is my favorite, dummy. Didn't my scrapbook teach you that? He blinked a few times, fighting back tears. Sure, the rigid tightness came from her looking at him, but her words touched a part of his heart that froze over the years as he tended to his father and his sins, morning after morning, until he hated every part of the curled soul in front of him. If he'd had Marinette beside him all along, would it still be like this? If he hadn't asked her to leave him there, at the monastery, in that room years ago, would things be different? Well, sure, things would be different. That would be obvious. They'd asked one of them to stay, but he didn't volunteer just because he was his son. He knew the coming months that rolled into years would take a toll on the one in charge of his punishments. He loved her. He loved her so much, he tried to shelter her from the punishment of Gabriel Agreste, and it had all but destroyed him.
Come here,
he said, and reached behind her scalp to pull her back to his chest, heart pounding as his wet eyes stung.
I love you.
He didn't want a response. He didn't need a response. He just needed her. And now that he was here with her, he wouldn't leave her. Not again. He'd never sacrifice like that again. Her fingers reached up his face, splitting around his ear, and for an involuntary moment, he held his breath like she held her head on his collarbone as she whispered, I love you, Adrian Agreste.